Hey guys, A.V. Songbird here. We are back with A.V. Songbird Reviews The Walking Dead. As you know, we went back to the beginning of the show and we are actually going through the old seasons while the new season, Season 6, is in full swing to get up to date. Last week we did Episode 4 of Season 1, Vatos, and this week we are doing Season 1, Episode 5, Wildfire, which you guys are gonna laugh. Every single time I read the title to this one, I think of the song Wildfire, and I know it has nothing to do with it, but I grew up listening to the song. I think it's by John Michael Montgomery, but it's a song that my mom used to play when I was growing up, so every time I hear the word Wildfire, I hear the song in my head. So if you haven't heard it, go listen to that song, and I love that song, but something about the subject matter of that song kind of reminds me of this episode anyway. But we're on to Episode 5, Wildfire. Okay, and last week, if you remember, we had the attack on camp. You know, Rick and his crew went into town, found out Merle had cut his hand off, and they came back after getting Glenn back and meeting Guillermo's crew and the Vatos in Atlanta. And they came back to the end, and there was the fight at camp, and a lot of people were killed off and everything. And Jim says he remembers why he was digging the holes. He remembers his dream now. So we're on to Episode 5. And it starts out at sunrise, and Rick's on the radio to Morgan and tells him how he found his family. And I do know there's going to be some of you, well, who else might be listening in? Who else might hear Rick's radio transmission? Shane already covered that. He said that their radios suck to hell, that they don't, reach the transmission from their radios doesn't reach even their cars or their CBs. The radios suck to crap, I think was his exact words. But Rick's on the radio to Morgan, tells him that he found his family. He told him about the attack on the camp. He says that their camp is a few miles northwest of the city at an old abandoned rock quarry. Rick tells Morgan to keep his son safe, that he'll try to reach him again tomorrow at dawn. He tells him that the city's not safe, it belongs to the dead now. Then we cut to Andrea, and Andrea's sitting silently with Amy, with a distant look on her face. She's holding her sister's hand. She's possibly catatonic, from the way she's just sitting there staring through Amy like she can't see her. She's definitely in shock and she's heartbroken, and I felt for her. She's sitting there. It's her sister. It's her only family that we know of that's right in front of her that she had after the world went to hell, and she's wondering what the hell to do now, or she's in shock and not wanting to worry about that yet. She hasn't gotten to that stage yet. Lori comes over to Andrea and sits down with her and attempts to comfort her. She tells her, we all cared about her. We'll be as gentle as we can, but we need to deal with this. And she's trying to be thoughtful. She's trying to be respectful. She gets no response from Andrea. Now, we don't know if it's that Andrea can't hear her or chooses not to respond at this point because she's lost to her grief right now. We can only imagine what Andrea was feeling. Then we cut to Daryl using a pickaxe to take out the brains of the walkers, and then all the other guys are taking the bodies and putting them into a burn pile to get rid of the walkers they killed the night before. Now, Rick returns to camp from where he was talking to Morgan, and he talks with the others about Andrea. He wants to figure out what they're going to do. And Lori says that Andrea had been sitting with her sister all night. She hadn't moved. She hadn't said anything. She was there. They all know that the Amy problem has to be dealt with, that Amy could come back at any time and hurt someone, that she needs to be dealt with. They can't just sit back and wait for it to happen because someone could seriously get hurt. Now, Rick goes over to talk to Andrea and says, he told everyone, I'll tell her how it is. He goes to talk to her, and Andrea pulls her gun and levels it on him. And you hear the gun cock. And she says, I know how the safety works. And she glares at him like she hates him, just seeing through him. And the ironic part is, remember, Rick, back at the department store when he first met Andrea, was the one that taught her about the safety and how the gun works. And from the look on his face, he looks panicked, and he looks like he's really rethinking his life choices at this point. So he holds up his hands and he's, okay, and backs off and gives her space, and she goes back to looking at her sister. And then the credits. Because they like to do major things before the credits roll on this show. I love it. It keeps us coming back, right? Now, we come back from the credits, and it's the group discussing Andrea and what to do about Amy. And Daryl says it has to be dealt with. The girl's a time bomb, which I agree with. And Lori says, leave her be. Which Lori says, leave it be. Well, Daryl and Morales get back to work dealing with the bodies. Trying to clear up the camp, because if they have to live there, they're going to want it cleared up before, anything else goes wrong. Glenn sees Morales and Daryl coming up to the pile with one of the fallen survivors, one of the people that they'd lived in camp with, and Glenn tells them they don't burn their own, that the walkers go over here and their survivors go over there. Glenn says, we don't burn our own, we bury them. And Daryl argues, well, they're all infected. And Glenn says, we bury our people, and he's very adamant about it. We don't burn our people, we bury them. And it's the most upset we've seen him so far on the show. It's the most adamant and the most stubborn we've ever seen Glenn on the show to date. And Daryl doesn't argue with him because he's not used to Glenn. Glenn has been very passive until now. He has been very go with the flow. Now, when they were in the city, he took point, but it's because he knew the city, he knew the streets. He's still very young. And to this point, we've seen him be passive, and he's been okay with going along with the plan that everyone else does, except for in the city. So to see him stand up for himself, and to see Daryl back down when he's sort of the more aggressive type of male, typically, really, to me, showed that Glenn's not afraid of asserting himself when he feels he's right. Now, Daryl didn't argue with him for once, but I did, before I move on, I wanted to point out the fact that I agreed with Daryl that they all should have been burned. Hear me out before you guys say that I'm heartless or insensitive. Throughout history, in times of plague, you burn the bodies to kill the infection, to stop the risk of infection being spread. If you bury the body, you run the risk of, as the bodies break down, if you don't know how the virus spreads. Now, they know, they're afraid to touch the other bodies. They're afraid of getting bit. They're afraid of that kind of thing. But if you don't know how a disease is spread, if you don't know how it's passed down, if you bury a body in the ground as that body decomposes and you don't know how long that virus lasts, it could get into the soil. And if it gets into the soil and it rains, it could get into the groundwater, And to me, it's a disease. The bodies should be burned, to me. And it's not a disrespect thing. It's a, don't just leave it for, the future to worry about. It's take care of it now so that the future doesn't have to worry as much about it. But that's just me. I think they all should be burned just, for safety's sake. We can't know how long the disease could live in the soil even after the bodies are gone. Or if it gets in groundwater and it gets into water supplies and then it's passed through the water supply. We don't know. So I think that's not smart of them to talk about burying. And it's not me trying to be disrespectful, as I said. Now, they go back to taking care of the bodies, and Daryl says that the survivors deserve the attack for what they did to Merle, that you reap what you sow. And Morales tells him, shut up, man. Well, Jackie's helping them clean up, and she finds blood on the front of Jim's shirt and finds out he's been bit. All the others come in, she runs them in there and tells everyone that Jim's been bit, and they discover that he has right here. He's got a full set of teeth bite on him. And the thing is, he's been working around them all day. He's been running around helping them clean up the bodies and moving around among the survivors all day, and they didn't know. And the question begs, how long does it take for someone to come back? I mean, yeah, Amy's been laying there all that time, but how long does it take them to come back? Is it different? Is it the same every time? Jim had just had sunstroke. Now, any of you that have had sunstroke in the past know that for the next few days you feel sluggish as hell. So if Jim were sitting around and he got sluggish and all of a sudden he slumped over and went unconscious, they might chalk that up to, oh, he had sunstroke, he's just tired. And then if someone walks by and he wakes up and reanimates, he could bite someone. I mean, that's just a thought I had, was he was walking around them all day. What if they saw him sluggish and thought something, then someone gets bit? So the fact that he could walk around among them and they may have thought that it was the after effects of heat stroke kind of freaked me out a little bit. So they find out he's bit, and they pull him aside and they sit him down, and the group talks about it, about Jim being bit. And Daryl says that he thinks they should pickaxe both of them, Jim and Amy, and just be done with it. And Shane asks, is that what you'd want if it were you? And Daryl says, hell yeah, I'd thank you while you did it. And Rick disagrees. He brings up the CDC and says he honestly feels it's Jim's best chance for survival and that it's the group's best chance for survival. He thinks that the government would protect the CDC at all costs. He feels that that would be their best chance to find out what's wrong and to get Jim help, and he thinks that's where they should go next. Now, Shane feels, on the other hand, that Fort Benning is their best chance at survival, that they'd have food, they'd have shelter, they'd have protection there, is how he feels. Now, the problem is, it's 100 miles in the opposite direction from the CDC, and none of them want to go to the CDC that's in Atlanta because they know what the situation is in Atlanta. Now, in an emergency situation, after they shut down airports and roadways, the problem is, like Rick said, the military is on the front lines. And I'm trying to think, how good would the security at a CDC actually be? For me personally, my first thought would be to go to the military base because they tend to, go military and bring out the military in emergency situations. But it's not that I'd feel safer there, but that's just my thought. But Daryl moves to kill Jim because he realizes that they're arguing over it, and he says someone has to have the balls to take care of this damn problem. Well, Rick comes up and pulls his gun on Daryl and says we don't kill the living. By the way, it's the second time Rick has pulled the gun on Daryl. And again, Daryl didn't flinch. But he says, we don't kill the living. And Daryl replies, that's funny coming from a man who just put a gun to my head, which is ironic. Well, Daryl gives up the pick and stalks off, and Rick takes Jim and puts him in the RV for his own protection. Now, Dale walks over and sits down with Andrea, who's still sitting with her sister at this point. And we learn that he lost his wife to cancer. That she went through all the chemotherapy, that she went through all the treatments for cancer and found out there was nothing they could do. And in the end, she accepted that she was going to pass. And Dale never accepted it. He was always angry. And he admits to Andrea that since she passed, Andrea and Amy were the first people that he ever cared for. And Andrea comes up to Dale. She actually reacts to him. He's the first person who can get a reaction out of her since Amy died. And she tells him that she was never there for Amy, that they were never really close, that she always meant to be there for her, but she never was. And she felt guilty for it. And she pulls the necklace that she had for Amy out, and he goes, well, this was her birthday, wasn't it? It dawns on him that today's Amy's birthday. And Andrea said, her birthday was always a week-long affair. I never made it, but I always meant to. I always thought I had time, which again, back to that constant thing about time in this show, right? Well, she holds the necklace, and they always bring it up that people always take it for granted that we have more time. We always assume that the people we love will be there tomorrow because they were there yesterday. We always take it for granted, which is one thing I like that they do bring up, because all of us are guilty of taking time for granted from time to time, and we really shouldn't. But she puts the necklace on her sister, and Dale tells her, you carry the weight already of so much. You shouldn't carry the guilt over this. This wasn't your fault. Well, Andrea puts the necklace on Amy, and Dale takes his leave. Then we flash over to Daryl, and Daryl's taking care of the bodies, taking the pick to the walkers' heads and the fallen's heads to make sure that they're not going to reanimate before they take care of the bodies. Well, Carol comes walking up as he goes to take care of Ed, and before he swings, Carol said, I'll do it. He was my husband. So Daryl gives her the pickaxe and backs up to give her a respectful amount of space. And she swings and takes Ed out. Well, the first swing is hard on her, and she hesitates. But she begins to swing. And you see her, and Carol's a very small character. She's portrayed as being very fragile physically and emotionally as a character. She's a battered woman character and a mother, and very quiet and mousy. And as she begins to swing this pickaxe, she swings harder and harder each time, and she starts to get angry. You see her go from being grieving and being heartbroken to being frustrated and angry and raging at this, and she's taking Ed out, and Daryl's standing back kind of looking at her. And the thing is, she's angry every time she swings for what he did to her all that time they were together. She's angry at the fact, not that he just treated her that way, not that he beat the hell out of her their whole relationship, but she's angry at him too. You have to figure, for dying. He abandoned her, and now all she's got is her and her daughter. They're alone aside from the group. So there's a lot wrapped up in that one moment with Carol and Ed's corpse and the pickaxe, and you can see it on her and how she goes from being heartbroken to being angry. And then by the time she's done swinging the pickaxe, it's like she's had a release of all the pent-up emotion that she's been carrying around for him. It was like it gave her maybe some measure of peace to at least get that out. I did want to talk about that. I feel for her in that moment because I feel she feels abandoned and betrayed by Ed because he died. And she feels scared, angry, and lost over the fact that he's gone, and now what the hell am I supposed to do? Now, we flash back over from that scene, we go back to Amy and Andrea, and Amy starts coming back. Very slowly at a time, she starts with twitches, and she starts coming back. And Andrea is hearing her and seeing her come back, and she starts saying her goodbyes to her sister, telling her that she's there for her, that she's sorry she was never there before, but that she's there now. And Amy starts to sit up and reach for her, and you feel afraid for Andrea. I did. But at the same time, you feel heartbroken that she's having to say this and know that she should have said this when Amy was alive. She shouldn't have waited for Amy to die to say these things. But at least she's getting the chance to say them. She tells Amy, "I'm here now, Amy. I'm here. I love you." And it's the last thing she says to her before she shoots her in the head and puts her down herself. And you look up and the rest of the group is gathered around. They were all ready to take Amy down, and they're all looking horrified at the fact that Andrea let Amy get so close to her, but I understood it. She wanted to do it herself. She wanted to be there for her sister in that moment because she wasn't with her for the rest of their lives. They were never close, and Andrea was sorry for that. So it fades out after that, and then we go to Shane and Rick. They're up on the hill, ironically where Jim was digging, and they're digging graves. And Rick knows that Shane's pissed off at him, and he goes, "Say it." And they argue back and forth about the fact that Rick wasn't there when the group was attacked. Now, Rick argues that if he hadn't brought the guns back, the whole camp might have been taken out, and Shane argues that if they'd had more men there at the time, it might have made all the difference. Which, I can understand both sides. You would need more people to protect the place, but if you don't have the weaponry that you needed to protect the place, then more people isn't necessarily going to help you without the right hardware to protect you. So I can understand both sides of that argument. Now, Daryl shows up in his truck and pulls his truck around with all the corpses in the back, and he says he feels that they're making a mistake, that they should burn the bodies, which again, I agree with, for the sake of... Now, if they died of colds or if they had simply died of something, not disease-related, I would have been fine with burying them. But burning them to get rid of the disease makes more sense for me, medically speaking. Now, the others arrive just as Daryl's saying he feels they shouldn't bury the bodies, they should burn them. And Lori says, "We need time to mourn, we need to bury our dead because that's what people do." Well, just because it's what people do, it doesn't mean that that's what needs to be done if there's a disease involved. And the sad thing is, with most people feeling that we should do it just because it's what people do, people wouldn't be thinking, well, it's a disease, we're passing it on possibly for future people to catch. We're not taking all the necessary precautions. And it's hard because when it's your loved ones, when it's your family, friends that you're looking at, you're not going to want to burn them. You're going to want to bury them. It would be hard to be cold and clinical about it when it's people you care about. So I understand that. what was it? Go flashback to Jim, and he's delirious in the RV. It shows that Jim's going through the stages and starting to very quickly go downhill. And then we flash back to the burial site on the hill, where Andrea is putting Amy into her grave and Dale's helping her put Amy in her grave. Then everyone walks back from the grave site, and we've got Rick promising Carl that he won't leave them again, that he's left for the last time. And when Carl walks off, Rick talks to Lori, and he says that, what was it? He asks Lori how she feels. And Lori says she feels that neither Rick nor Shane was entirely wrong. Rick says, well, with more guns we're stronger, and Lori argues with fewer people we're weaker, which both are right, I feel. But that's just my personal opinion. You know, you need people and you would need protection to be able to make sure that you could keep the group safe. Without weapons, without people, you don't have anyone to survive. So I felt both were right again. Rick learns from Lori that she doesn't agree with him about the CDC, that she feels the way the rest of the group does, that if the group were to tell Rick that they wanted to head towards the city and Rick had any second thoughts about it, he wouldn't be a part of it. You know, everyone's terrified of the fact that Rick is essentially asking them to go right back into the fire, into the city, when that's the last thing they want to do. The group that came up of walkers and attacked their camp came from the city as far as they know. Now, Lori asks Rick to tell her something with certainty because she knows he's not certain about his plan. She says, tell me something with certainty. And Rick looks desperate at that moment to me. He looks very uncertain, like he's searching for what he wants to say, what he's sure about. And he looks at her dead in the eyes and he says, I love you. That's all I've got. And Lori kind of smiles and she says, I love you too. And they hug it out. And then we flash to the RV. Lori goes in to where Carol's taking care of Jim. And she takes Carol away and says, let's go outside. Well, it leaves Jim and Rick to talk. Rick says he wants to get Jim help. And they talk a little bit about God and about, you know, the situation as it is. And Rick says he wants to get Jim help. Well, then Jim spits up blood, and you can tell from the look on Rick's face that he knows it's getting dire and that things are definitely quickly going south with Jim. Then the line Jim gave after that haunted me. It was like he was going delirious. He was slipping out of being lucid, and he was going into being delirious. But he said something about watch the mangroves. Their roots will gouge the whole boat. Amy's there swimming, and he looks at Rick and says, you'll watch the boat, right? You said you would. And Rick looks at him and he looks kind of troubled and he says, I'll watch the boat. And Jim kind of nods his head. I want to know what that line meant. It could have been just him talking because he was delirious from fever, you know, but that line, it was haunting to me. I wanted to know what it meant, you know. Lori's sitting out on the step outside the RV, and Shane comes up to her and says, you got to talk sense into Rick. The CDC, it's a bad idea. You know I'm right, Lori. And Lori says, I'm backing him. He's my husband. And Shane says, it may be time for you to be the dutiful wife. You know, fixing your marriage isn't worth putting the group at risk. And Lori says, they can make up their minds without bringing my marriage into it. It's a habit you need to break. And Shane says, maybe I'll add that to the list of habits I'm breaking. And just then, Rick comes down out of the RV from talking to Jim and goes, what habits? And Shane says, I'm just talking about my habit of needing a plan, man. And Lori says, I told Shane that we should trust your gut. And I don't know if it's Shane's kind of shifty manner, the fact that he's kind of shifting a little bit as far as physically, he's shifting awkwardly. And the fact that Lori immediately backs Rick. You see a suspicious look in Rick's eyes over them talking and their manner. And he looks to each of them and you get the feeling that Rick gets the feeling there's something going on there that isn't right. So part of me wonders if that's not him kind of figuring out that not everything is right with the three of them. Shane looks at Rick and says, let's go do our sweep, man. They go off in the woods and they start arguing back and forth about what they should do. And Rick says, I feel when we want to be safe, we should swim to shore, not further out to sea. I feel you're wrong about Fort Benning. And Shane feels that he's taking too big a risk and he's putting everyone's life at risk. So he doesn't feel good about it. Well, Rick says, if it was your family, you'd feel differently. And Shane's basically, what the hell did you just say to me? Well, they hear a noise in the woods, so Rick takes off to go figure out what the noise is. Typical Rick, take point and let Shane cover his 6. Shane's pissed over what Rick said, and Shane's pissed about a lot of things. So he pulls his gun and levels it on Rick. And you see the wheels turning in his head. You see him making decisions in his head and connecting dots. And he's tracking Rick with the barrel of his gun. Well, all of a sudden you look up and Dale's standing there and looks at Shane, looks at his gun and goes, Jesus. And Shane lowers his gun and goes, oh, I know, we'll have to wear vests, and tries to play it off like he thought Rick was a walker. But you could tell when Shane turns to walk away, Dale's watching him. And you can tell from the look in Dale's eyes that he wasn't buying it. So we go back to the group, and, Shane and Rick come back to the group, and the group reconvenes to talk more about the plan. They need to figure out what they're going to do. Obviously, they're not safe. So the group reconvenes, and Shane says he trusts Rick's instincts, that he feels the group should go to the CDC, that the group should stick together, and for those who agree with him, they leave in the morning. So the next dawn, it fades out, it fades in. We come back at dawn, the sun rose again, and Rick's back on the radio with Morgan. And he updates Morgan, says it's not safe here anymore, we can't stay in camp anymore. We'll leave a map for you on taped to a red car so you can find out where we're going. Then we flash over and the group gears up to go, and we find out that Morales, his wife, and their kids are planning on heading on to Birmingham, to where they have family. And they're planning on leaving the group because they feel that's what's best for them. And Rick gives them a .357 and half a box of ammo to take with them. Daryl, of course, scoffs at it because it seems like Rick keeps giving away more and more of their guns, which they went into the city and risked their lives to get, and he keeps giving away more and more guns. Morales' daughter, I'm not sure if they ever gave her a name. Morales' daughter gives Carol's daughter Sophia her doll before they leave. The whole group packs up and the whole group moves out. And we've got Dale and Glenn, Jackie and Jim in the RV. We've got Rick, Lori, Carol, Sophia, and Carl in Carol's Cherokee. We've got Andrea and T-Dog in the Lutheran church van. We've got Daryl in his truck with the motorcycle in the back. And then we've got Shane bringing up the rear in his Jeep. Sorry, you guys, I'm trying to picture it in my head. And they all take off for the CDC. Down the road a little bit after they got underway, the hose gave out on their RV. Because remember, they were supposed to get the one from the Cube van that was stolen. The RV leaves them stranded on the side of the road, and Jackie comes running out and tells them that Jim's really bad. Well, Shane and T-Dog take off to go to the gas station up the road that they see up the road with his binoculars to see if there's something they could use to jerry-rig together the RV so they could get back underway again. Well, Rick goes in to talk to Jim and says, we'll be back on the road again, and Jim goes, I can't take it. I can't take it. Just leave me here. I can't handle this. It hurts so much. I can't go any further. And Rick tries to talk him out of it. Jim says, no, leave me here. Let me be with my family. And Rick says, your family's dead. You've been delirious more often than not. We can't leave you here. I can't live with that. And what was it? Jim said, I'm letting you off the hook. I'm lucid now. I don't know how long I'll be that way. I'm letting you off the hook. This is my decision, not your failure. So Rick goes outside the RV and tells everyone what Jim's decision is, and they talk about it. And the group decides to honor his opinion, his wishes. It's his decision to make. It's not theirs. So, yeah, Dale agreed with Daryl on this one. So, yeah, but it was his decision to make. It's his life. It's his decision to make. So Shane and Rick carried Jim out very carefully, and they set him beside a tree. And the whole group goes quiet. Everyone comes up to kind of say their goodbyes to Jim and to thank him for helping them for as long as they did. And that moment, everyone was quiet. Everyone was respectful. They came up and they said their goodbyes. They thanked him. Rick offered him a gun in case he wanted to take care of it. And Jim said, no, you'll need it, and gave it back and said, I'll be okay. And the last one to say anything was Daryl, and even he was quiet and respectful of Jim in that moment, or seemed to be respectful even for Daryl in that moment. And he kind of gave Jim a nod, and all of them went and got back in their cars. And then they all took off just as Jim seemed to lose consciousness, or maybe he finally gave in. But I remember how human a moment that was. You know, that they were all quiet and respectful. They all understood it was his decision to make, and he made it for them too, to keep them safe, not just for himself. And then it fades out. Now we fade in, and it's a computer screen, which for any of you who left on the commercial break and came back, you may think you came back too late and you were on the wrong show, but it flashes to a computer screen that says Wildfire, or Project Wildfire, I think it was. MSV 3417 active, and it says transmission started. And a guy comes on screen. And he said it's 194 days since wildfire was declared. It's 63 days since the disease suddenly went global. And he says his name is Jenner. He said he's made no clinical progress on the disease itself, and he says that he's living underground, that he can't sleep normal hours. So you're going, why is he living underground? But he's talking about it, and it said, it shows him, it flashes over, and it shows him running clinical tests on brain matter in an actual lab, and he's got music going, which was weird for me. He's got music going, he's got lights going, he's in a lab, he's running clinical tests on brain matter. He actually ran it through a centrifuge and was going through all kinds of tests on it. Well, it shows him he starts falling asleep in his lab, and he wakes up with a start because an alarm goes off, and he knocks over a decanter of something acidic and knocks it onto the brain matter, and an alarm goes off. Well, he gets up and has to run out of the room because it's a clean chamber, it's a secured chamber, and the corrosive fumes are in the air. So he gets up, strips out of his stuff, and goes to get out. Well, you hear a computerized voice come up. Hazardous material deemed corrosive in the air, you know, that everyone get out of the room, basically, that full decontamination's in effect. Well, he screams no and plasters himself to the glass and screams no. All of a sudden, it flash burns everything in his lab. Flash burns it. Well, he stands there and he kind of lets his head fall against the glass like he's given up, like, shit, what just happened? Well, it flashes off and flashes back on, and it shows him sitting back at his computer like he was before, and he's drinking. He's not straight out of the bottle, but he's drinking. And he's vlogging again. Yeah, I said he's vlogging. He was recording on his computer like I am, and I like the fact that it flashed over and made it look like it wasn't a secure line or that it wasn't a stable connection. And he's talking about how he's lost all of his experiment. He's lost all of his samples, and they were the freshest samples by far, that the other samples were far too necrotic for him to use, that it wouldn't do him any good to try. He feels that no one's left watching his reports at this point, which if he's been sitting at that desk and he's been reporting everything and no one's answering him, he would feel very alone. So we get the feeling that he feels that he's losing any faith. He says tomorrow he's thinking of blowing his brains out, and he says, but tonight I'm getting drunk. And it's like, okay, is it really that bad? What do you know that we don't know? You know, the camera zooms out, and the room where he's sitting, that's full of computers. It's a big round room with a halo-looking light above him, but it's got a full computer bank of computers and monitors and everything. And the room's completely empty except for him. He stands up and he throws the wine bottle, and you hear it just shatter, you know? And it, to me, felt like he was getting frustrated. You know, understatement of the year, right? Now, we flash outside, and Rick's group is just pulling up outside the CDC. And out back, they've got a military cordon set up. A makeshift military cordon set up. You know, they've got sandbags, they've got roadblocks everywhere, they've got military stuff everywhere, and there's bodies scattered everywhere wearing military dress and civilian dress. So it was the people from the cordon and people that came in for help. The flies are thick everywhere. Rick and his group pick their way through the military cordon and through the corpses to get to the front door of the CDC, but all the electronic and metal shutters have been brought down at the CDC, and it says keep clear. So they go up to it, and Shane knocks on the door, and Rick knocks on the door, and the group talks about, well, there's nobody here, and Rick goes, well, then why are these shutters down if there's no one here? And he goes to knock on the door. Well, Daryl yells that there's walkers. Well, the group starts arguing back and forth about, there has to be someone here, or what are we going to do? We can't be in the city after dark because all the walkers there. And they don't have a lot of options, and they're arguing Fort Benning. Well, they found out it's 125 miles to Fort Benning now. They have no fuel, they have no food, they're stuck there, and they don't know what they're going to do, and Rick hasn't planned anywhere beyond getting to the CDC, so they're finding that out now, that he hadn't had anything planned beyond it. And Shane's still harping on, we got to do Fort Benning. So things are getting desperate for the group, and the walkers are starting to close in. Well, Rick turns around and looks, and he sees the camera move on the wall. And he says, the camera, it moved. And Dale says, you imagined it. Well, he goes, no, it moved. And Shane says, no, it's just cues. It's winding down. It's just automated. Don't worry about it. Maybe it's motion sensor, I guess. And Rick goes, no, the computer moved. And inside, Jenner has heard an alarm going off on his computer, so he goes and looks, and you can see the diagram up on his computer that he's got motion sensors, and it flashes to a camera, the one we just saw move, that shows Rick and his group. And Jenner says, no, just go away. He doesn't look happy to see them at all. He looks very distressed to see them. And he says, no, just go away. Well, Rick pounds on the door because he just saw the camera move, so maybe it means there's someone in there. And he pounds on the door, and there's no answer. Well, Shane starts fighting him because he's making a lot of noise, and the walkers are already coming in from all sides. They need to get out of there. They need to get away from there before the walkers close in and kill them all. Well, Rick refuses to be dragged away, and he's pounding on the door, and he's screaming at the camera. We have women, children, no food, very little fuel left. You're killing us. Let us inside. We don't have any choice. Let us in, please. We're dying out here. And Shane is dragging Rick away, and everyone's freaking out, and everybody's terrified. Well, all of a sudden, you hear the shutter roll back, and this blinding white light shoots out the door, and it's blinding. And the entire group is so shocked and just thrown into silence by this light. And we see the light shine through the group, and we're seeing the group from behind looking at the light. And then, fade to credits. So a lot happened this episode, I really like this episode for the fact that with this show, it doesn't look polished. A lot of work goes into this show, and you can see it so much in every shot. The attention to detail. I'm going to say that a lot through this. There's a lot of attention to detail in this show. But I like the fact that the characters don't look polished, the fact that they have tears in their clothes, the fact that they're covered in dirt and covered in blood, and the fact that it's very humanizing. This show, you come face to face with things in this show, and the characters come face to face with things in this show that make you think about your life. Am I taking my family for granted? What would I do if I was in that situation? God, I can't imagine what I'd do in that situation, At the end of the day, I love this show for the characters, for the story, for the fact that it doesn't come across as being polished. It doesn't come across as being perfect. For the fact that none of the characters is perfect. They all have screw-ups, they all have hang-ups, they all have stupid shit they do they shouldn't, that they know they shouldn't, but they do it anyway to show that they're human, and because they're human. So that's something I really love about this show. But that was Season 1, Episode 5. That was Wildfire from The Walking Dead. Reviewed by A.V. Songbird. I hope you guys are enjoying these. This one was actually shorter than the episode. I'm excited about this one. But I hope you guys are really enjoying this series. It's getting easier for me to talk about the episodes because I'm relaxing into it. And with me being a writer, I'm a bookworm from hell, and, I love stories and picking apart characters, and I love delving deeper into things than some people would, to pick the stories apart and try to figure out why the characters what they do what they do and what they're gonna do, and try to figure out, okay, this is what's gonna happen down the road. That's fun for me, and I hope it's fun for you guys too. I love to hear different people's takes and different people's theories on what's going to happen and why the characters act the way they do and do what they do. So I look forward to hearing from you guys on this one, and I hope you're enjoying this series as much as I'm enjoying doing this series. And I look forward to seeing you guys in future episodes, I hope. It's actually 12:10 in the morning on, I think it's Wednesday. I have a hard time keeping my days straight sometimes, but it's 12:10 in the morning. I was going to go do this season finale of season 1 next. I'm doing these back to back. So I hope to see you guys in the next episode. This has been A.V. Songbird. Bye, guys.